This is Maximus Aviation.
Coming up on this all-new edition of Maximus Aviation News Week in Review, the NTSB preliminary report is in on the deadly Richard McSpadden Russ plane crash, and shockingly we find out that both pilots survived the initial impact. Also, Alaska Air faces more turbulence in the wake of jump seat pilot Joe Emerson's attempt to bring down a loaded jet. Also, Boeing continues to lose billions on the new twin-sister Air Force One planes, and flight attendants from multiple airlines are suddenly getting cancer. I'll tell you why. Air Canada is also in the news again as they continue to mistreat disabled passengers, and the US F-35 fighter may not be a dud after all. That's all next on this giant edition of Maximus Aviation Week in Review. Well, the US NTSB recently released its preliminary report on the accident that killed AOPA Vice President of Safety Richard McSpadden Jr. and former NFL tight end, pilot, and charter owner Russ Francis. Both men died in the October 1st plane crash in Lake Placid, New York. McSpadden 63 and Francis 70. Both held commercial pilot certificates flying a Cessna 177RG that belonged to Lake Placid Air Service owned by Russ Francis. The reason for the flight, in which McSpadden was in the right seat, was to take scenic pictures for McSpadden's AOPA magazine, along with a Beechcraft Bonanza A36. Per company procedure for photo flights, the pilot owner Francis would fly the airplane during the takeoff, climb out, and landing. After joining up in formation, the pilot-rated passenger McSpadden would have taken over the controls and flown the airplane as the photo shoots require formation flying. Both pilots were experienced, especially McSpadden, who was rated on multiple types of aircraft and helicopters, as well as an experienced Air Force fighter pilot and former member of the Air Force Thunderbirds with decades of experience as a formation pilot. The NTSB said there were several witnesses to the crash. One told investigators that when McSpadden's plane pulled up next to the Beech A36 photo plane on the taxiway, his airplane suddenly shut down, but about 10 seconds later they restarted the engine. Witnesses said that during the takeoff roll the engine surged, but then it sounded as if it was producing full power in the climb. The Cardinal then made a gentle left turn at an altitude of approximately 300 to 400 feet above the ground, where it met up with the Beech A36 photo plane. But when the aircraft were about 1,000 feet apart in the air, the Cardinal suddenly made a hard right turn back to the airport. However, during the turn, the pilot of the Beechcraft A36 photo plane said that McSpadden transmitted on the Common Traffic Advisory frequency, "We have a problem and we're turning back to the airport." But sadly, his plane never made it back to the runway. The aircraft came down about 15 feet below the lip of the plateau on an embankment off the end of the runway, in a right wing and low nose attitude. The aircraft slid down a 30-foot embankment, coming to rest upright in a ravine about 440 feet from the approach end of runway 14 and 250 feet to the left of the center line. Surprisingly, there was no fire, even though fuel was pouring out of the airplane because of compromised fuel tanks. However, according to witnesses interviewed by the local media, both men were conscious after the impact, but getting covered by the aviation fuel pouring on them from the aircraft. However, when first responders arrived, the witnesses said they moved away to give the responders room to work. But just a few minutes later, a law enforcement officer made the official announcement that both men had in fact died. But the most puzzling fact in the report is that so far in the preliminary investigation, the NTSB said they found no mechanical issues with the engine whatsoever. The engine and propeller were still attached to the aircraft at the time of the crash. But the investigation is still ongoing and could take up to a year to complete. Well, I'm sure you're all well aware that pilot Joe Emerson, an off-duty Alaska Airlines captain, was hitching a free commuter ride on a Horizon flight from Everett to San Francisco when he tried to bring the plane down by pulling the engine extinguishers in flight, and is now charged with 83 counts of attempted murder. Well, of course, now comes word of a class action lawsuit by at least one and possibly many more passengers on that flight. The lawsuit filed in King County Superior Court seeks damages for psychological injury and emotional and physical distress to the passengers. It further asks for an injunction requiring Alaska and Horizon, both subsidiaries of Alaska Air Group, to conduct reasonable examinations of, including but not limited to, specific questioning and focused observation of all flight crew and employees with access to the cockpit immediately prior to boarding an aircraft. Emerson is alleged to have told police he had been struggling with depression for 6 months and hadn't slept in 40 hours. He also said he took psychedelic mushrooms about 2 days before the incident. He even said he had contemplated, shall we say, the fate of his own existence recently. It's YouTube, so read between the lines. Emerson, 44, had just renewed his pilot's license 3 months before, which means he passed the regular psychiatric evaluation required of all commercial airline pilots. However, he appears to have hidden his struggles of depression with the airline, and that raised concern about the degree of oversight of mental health issues among pilots. Being open about such problems is a career risk that can lead to a pilot being grounded. It's unknown at this point if any of Emerson's pilot colleagues or managers were aware of his mental problems. The lawsuit cites the failure of Alaska and Horizon Airlines to report Emerson's lack of sleep, drug abuse, and mental health condition, to challenge his fitness to be in the cockpit, and to educate and train their employees to prevent the foregoing breaches and otherwise to keep passengers safe. Well, turning to Boeing news, massive cost overruns for the new Air Force One jets continue to pile on Boeing, drowning the company in red ink. Boeing recently reported another $482 million in red ink on a contract to retrofit 2 747 jets into the next generation of the presidential Boeing 747s, officially known by their Air Force moniker VC-25A and B. Well, they have now lost more than $1 billion on each of the 2 planes. The company has been reporting losses on the planes for years, as CEO Dave Calhoun admitted last year that the company should have never signed a contract with the Air Force to produce the planes for $3.9 billion. Supplier costs have soared since then, and the delivery date has been continually pushed back. Boeing took a $1.45 billion loss on the planes last year and $318 million in 2021. In April, Calhoun said of Air Force One, "Well, I'm just going to call it a very unique moment, a very unique negotiation, and a very unique set of risks that Boeing probably shouldn't have taken, but we are where we are." The company said the latest loss on the program is a result of engineering challenges, labor instability, as well as the resolution of negotiations with one of its suppliers. Very often, higher costs on defense contracts can be passed on to the U.S. taxpayers. But under pressure from then-President Donald Trump, who was threatening to cancel the contract for the planes, Boeing agreed to a fixed-price contract on the 2 new jets. Hey, you can't blame the orange man for that one. Sounds like a shrewd deal if you ask me. Boeing should have just said no if they didn't like the deal. Well, in a story that is sure to send shockwaves throughout the aviation world, not only to airline employees but passengers also, because a Korean Air flight attendant's death from cancer was recently determined by South Korea's labor panel to be directly linked to the radiation exposure from his work as a flight attendant. Yeah, let that sink in for a minute. It was determined that the death of a 53-year-old male flight attendant was caused by cosmic radiation. Yes, cosmic radiation, during his time spent flying with Korean Airlines. The flight attendant, identified as Cho-sun, or Song in English, was diagnosed with late-stage stomach cancer in April of 2021. Song worked as a flight attendant from 1995 to 2021. In those 25 years, he spent nearly 1,022 hours on board a plane each year. Approximately half of Song's flight hours were on long-haul routes to North America and Europe, which pass through the Arctic, where there is a higher exposure compared to other routes. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, recognized the concentration of radioactivity in the Arctic region. The agency said this is due to the high number of nuclear sources in parts of the Arctic atmosphere and the vulnerability of Arctic systems to radioactive contamination. A report by Channel News Asia (CNA) said that Korean Air denied any wrongdoing in Song's cancer and eventual death. In a statement, the airline said Korean Air strictly manages individual data and crew members can check their accumulated amount of cosmic radiation exposure, which is updated on a daily basis. The IAEA found that air crew and frequent flyers receive higher radiation doses from cosmic radiation than the general public. And as if that isn't terrifying enough, it's not only the sun that's killing airline flight attendants, but their uniforms too. Because 4 American Airlines flight attendants who claimed that their work uniform made them sick were awarded more than $1 million by a jury at the Alameda County Superior Court in California. The lawsuit filed by more than 400 flight attendants against clothing manufacturer Twin Mill alleged that the 2016 batch of new American Airlines uniforms were chemically treated with formaldehyde, toluene, and other toxic chemicals. These chemicals, especially formaldehyde, were used to keep the uniform fabric from wrinkling. The toxic chemicals found in the uniform fabrics allegedly caused a myriad of health issues for American Airlines employees, ranging from skin irritation to respiratory problems. One of the plaintiffs, Tracy Silver Sharan, worked as a flight attendant for 37 years and had gone through several uniform changes with American Airlines. In an interview with the Washington Post, she said that she did not suspect that it was the 2016 uniform batch that was making her violently sick. Silver Sharan said that she observed that she immediately felt better after flights when she would return home and change her clothes. After reporting the issue to her employer, Silver Sharan was allowed to wear uniforms from older batches. However, her symptoms persisted whenever she worked around those who continued to wear the treated uniforms. In November of 2016, Silver Sharan was forced to take 6 months leave due to the gravity and persistence of her health issues. American Airlines eventually ended the contract with Twin Hill and entered into a new contract with U.S. clothing company Land's End to provide new uniforms. In October 2023, the jury decided that uniforms provided by Twin Hill were a substantial factor in causing harm to the flight attendants. The jury awarded Silver Sharan $320,000 for economic losses and non-economic losses, including physical pain and mental suffering. Another flight attendant, Brenda Sabatino, was awarded the biggest sum of $750,000. Well, fresh off an embarrassing issue of Air Canada forcing passengers to sit in puke-covered seats, then to be removed from the plane for not wanting to do so, Air Canada has been summoned by the Canadian federal government to address a series of high-profile incidents involving the airline's mishandling of passengers with disabilities. Canada's Transportation Minister Pablo Rodriguez said via social media that he has summoned Air Canada to meet with him and the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion, and Persons with Disabilities to address the series of unfortunate incidents. Rodriguez also said that he was horrified to learn of another incident, referring to 49-year-old Vancouver resident Rodney Hodgins, who has cerebral palsy and was forced to drag himself off an Air Canada aircraft when the carrier failed to provide wheelchair assistance. The second incident involved Canada's Chief Disability Officer, Stephanie Cadieux, who took to social media to share her disappointing experience after Air Canada lost her wheelchair during a cross-country flight. During the IATA Accessibility Symposium in October of 2023, Cadieux said travel is central to so many of our lives. The sector needs to focus on each traveler as an individual customer. People with disabilities need to be treated humanely, not as carry-on luggage or a wheelchair, but as a passenger. The third incident involved 44-year-old professional stand-up comedian Ryan LaChance, who was flying back to Vancouver after attending a comedy festival in Halifax. When LaChance arrived in Vancouver, He did not get the expected eagle lift to transport him to his wheelchair outside the aircraft. Instead, 2 airline staff tried to carry him to his wheelchair. In the process, LaChance was accidentally dropped on the aircraft floor, which he said bruised his back and took him days to recover from. Rodriguez said that Air Canada must present a plan to address the problem at the meeting, adding that all Canadians must be treated with dignity and respect. And finally, for the first time ever, an Israeli Air Force F-35 fighter jet shot down a cruise missile in midair. A cruise missile launched from Yemen, presumably by the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, was detected by the IAF heading towards the Israeli airspace. While the precise date of the incident remains undisclosed by the IAF, multiple missile launches from Yemen were reported on October 31, 2023. After detecting the incoming threat, the IAF scrambled fighter jets to intercept the missile. Cockpit footage of the interception was released showing what likely is a Hoviez or Sumar cruise missile being shot down in flight by an air-to-air missile, likely an AIM-9X Sidewinder. Later that same day, the IAF reported that the Arrow aerial defense system came into play when it intercepted a surface-to-surface missile in the area of the Red Sea. Back in May of 2018, the IAF made headlines when it disclosed having used its F-35 for targeted attacks in Syria and Lebanon, making Israel the first nation to employ this aircraft in a combat operation. Well, how about that? The F-35 actually works. Well, that's going to wrap up the Maximus Aviation weekly edition of the Aviation Roundup. So who watched all the stories? Who stayed till the end? Let me know down below. And before you go, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and ring the bell. And remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, this is Maximus.